And this is The Times at One with Andrew Neil. The barrister who represents Lucy Letby is preparing what he calls fresh medical evidence in a bid to get her case before the Court of Appeal. She was convicted of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of another 7 at the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital about a decade ago. So far, the appeal court has twice refused to hear efforts to reopen the case on the basis that the grounds for appeal were, in their words, not arguable. But the campaign to reopen what some regard as a catastrophic miscarriage of justice continues. And one of the campaigners is Conservative MP David Davis. He joins me now in the studio. David Davis, welcome.
Hi.
Lucy Letby was convicted to 2 different trials of the murder of 7 babies, attempted murder of 7 others. The appeal court, as I said, refused to grant leave to appeal. There's now an official inquiry into what lessons should be learned. Shouldn't that be the end of the matter?
No. I mean, firstly, let's deal with the appeal court. The appeal court has ridiculous rules on this. It says, basically, if there's no new evidence, its words, then it won't hear it. It doesn't want to sort of second guess a jury. No. You can still see that nominal logic. But when there are 11 million words of transcript, when there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pages of evidence, you're relying on the fact that the lawyers and our solicitor don't miss anything, which of itself is
impossible.
Is impossible, right? But if something was in that heap of paper, then too bad, you can't use it, which is wrong. And the Law Commission, as we sit here, is reviewing that exact set of rules. So that's one problem. But maybe it would help your listeners just to know how I came on this, because I thought she was a monster a year or 2 ago. Anyway, when it all went through, and by accident, somebody drew my attention to an article in the New Yorker magazine, right?
This was a big reconstruction, one of these typical long American magazine reads.
And as you will know, the New Yorker is famous for its good fact-checking, right?
In depth.
And absolutely in depth. 13,000-word article. I tried to look at it online, and it was blocked, right, by a court order. I couldn't read about the case. And so I thought, what's going on? So I raised a question in Parliament. I asked Alex Chalk, as it was then, the Justice Minister, why can't we read about this? Anyway, that sort of put my name and hers together. The next 2 weeks, 16 different experts, I mean experts, not conspiracy theorists, experts called me up. And I'm talking about the past president of the Royal Statistical Society, the past president of the Royal College of Paediatrics, professors of forensic law. These are really, and they all pretty much said the same thing. We don't know if she's guilty, but the bit that I know about is rubbish. So all the pillars...
And yet that had been evidence in the court.
Evidence in the court. So the statistical... And this, as I started to dig, I actually spent... before I actually said anything proper on it, I spent 3 months going through the day-by-day accounts of the court. And what I came to the conclusion was, Andrew, firstly, the stats, if anything, work in her favour, not against. Let me give you an example. There were 17 deaths. She was on duty for 40% of the shifts. Multiply 40% times 17, you get to something like 7. They had picked out the 7 she'd been on.
So she was present on all of these deaths, the 7 that occurred, and present at the attempted. She was usually on duty, but she was also present at times when she wasn't even supposed to be there.
Yeah, because she was the best regarded nurse. She was one of the only 2 that were properly qualified for the thing. She lived on site in the nurse's home, and she was saving up to get a house. So she was doing.
You mean she was nearby?
She was nearby, and she was anxious to do lots of work. But there were 17 deaths. There weren't 7. There were 17, and that was a big spike in a place where it normally falls. Anyway. So, to cut a long story short, went through it all and came to the conclusion, this wasn't the only hospital that had this sort of size of spike in deaths. There were 3 others at roughly the same time. And the reasons, in my view, is just bad medical care. Accidents by doctors, indeed, including some of the doctors who accused her.
Well, is another way of coming at this, an alternative explanation? Rather than Lucy Letby being the murderer.
Yeah.
Is it possible that this was a case of a failing hospital?
Yep.
And that there was a catastrophic failure in the neonatal unit itself.
Yes.
Is that your view?
That is my view. It's also, incidentally, effectively the view of the Royal College. They did a report on it, and the day Letby was suspended, they downgraded the hospital to a lower level because it wasn't able to cope. But also, if you look at the details, one of the supposedly murdered babies had the doctor pushed a needle into its abdomen, nominally to release air from her stomach, actually penetrated the liver and caused enormous bleeding and 40% drop in haemoglobin levels. Now, and that's one that was supposed to be murdered by Letby, On other occasions, we know people told lies. I mean, one of the doctors said, oh, well, I came upon her standing over a baby that was basically asphyxiating, and she hadn't called anybody. Well, actually, in his emails at the time, he said, she did call me. So you got really, really, really bad evidence.
I mean, I don't want to go down the conspiracy route because they usually turn out to be wrong.
Need to.
But you could kind of take the view that it's convenient that this nurse has been blamed to hush up yet another scandal in the NHS.
Well, it's scapegoating, certainly, I think is a fairly sizable probability.
But let me put this to you, because there are, most famously, in the case against her, or at least the simplest thing for people to understand, because as you say, it's very complicated, are the notes found at her home, which include notes by her, and the content was, I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to kill them. I'm evil, I did this. And I directed it at the babies she had murdered. Today is your birthday, and you're not here, and I'm not sorry for that.
Yeah. Well, she was told by her counsellor, a psychiatric counsellor, to write down everything she felt, all her emotions. And at the end of the one you mentioned about, I'm evil, I did this, I was not good enough, the end of that same piece of paper, not read out by the prosecution, it said, why is this happening to me? I've done nothing wrong, on the same piece of paper. So, these are scraps of Post-it notes. Diary specialists in other cases have said this is a ridiculous use of this information. It's confirmation bias, and this is one of the problems. As you account, you've got 14 different cases. If you take any single one of these cases, it wouldn't have made it to court, let alone led to a conviction. But when you pile them all together, and you start off, as you quite rightly say, with this seven cases where she was on duty, and that looks really suspicious. Of course it does, if you don't know there are 17. And then you start saying, oh, well, she's guilty. And of course, the only reason that this would happen is because she's guilty. And that's very, very plain happening throughout the entire case.
What do you say to the families of the victims who thought they had closure with this? Well, the parents of these little babies, it was a terrible time for them, and they thought, at least we have the comfort of knowing that the person behind this.
And it must be agony for them, and I recognise that. But let us take your point about, this might be just a system failure and somebody being blamed for a system failure. If it is a system failure, and I am reasonably certain that it was, because, as I say, there were 3 other hospitals with the same problem, if we don't fix it, there'll be more parents down the road who've got dead babies to grieve over, And if I were a parent on this, and I don't want to put myself in their position generally, but if I were a parent, I would want the answer. And I want the answer in a way that would save other babies. And out of this, they're going to come at the end of the process, because bear in mind, I don't want her pardoned. I want her retried. I understand. Yeah. At the end of this process, there'll be 2 huge policy issues, right? One is the state of our legal system.
And our appeal system.
And our appeal system, but also the court system, which allows experts employed by one side or the other, so-called experts, who then come along and give the convenient view, right?
It's kind of an American import, that.
It is. It's a terrible import, in fact. And so we need to put that right through to the appeal system. There's a lot of things wrong with the justice system on one hand. But on the other hand, and maybe more important, we need to do something about allowing the health service to heal itself, to actually get this right, to have a proper review. 20-odd years ago, you might even remember, 20-odd years ago, I had a look at the health service when I was PAC chairman. And
that's the Public Accounts Committee, which looks at all government spending.
Yeah, but I did this sort of privately, having done all of that, and spending and effectiveness. And I thought, if you're an airline pilot and you make a mistake, there's a system whereby you can report yourself and the system learns from it. So, if you reach down and press the wrong button, the system may say, OK, we need to retrain pilots, or we need to change the design to move
Is the button in the right place?
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. There's nothing like that
No.
in healthcare. And if we had that, you've got fantastic safety on the airlines. We would dramatically increase the safety of healthcare. And at the end of the day, maybe the outcome of Letby will be a serious look at putting this right.
But everywhere you look in the bodies involved here, it's rather dispiriting. You've mentioned the courts, you've mentioned the appeals system. Lucy Letby's lawyers have submitted evidence to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which I understand considers whether cases should go forward to appeal or not. And of course, this body itself has been deemed not fit for purpose.
Yeah, it's just got a new head.
It's got a new head because the
Vera
previous...
Baird, who said it's not good enough.
Yeah.
She her first day in office. And because, again, for your listeners, there was a man called Andrew Malkinson who was convicted of rape 17 years ago.
Yes.
4 years after the conviction, they got DNA evidence actually disproving the conviction, and it took another 13 years for the CCRC to get him through the system.
And that was a fault of the commission itself.
Yeah, and you got this Sunderland, and the one who's been in for 30-odd years. Again, why was he in for 30-odd years? The system is terrible, and it has to be corrected. It replaced the Home Secretary ruling on it. Back in the times of the Guildford War and so on.
Right.
And
the Birmingham Six.
The IRA bombings and so on. The Home Secretary would get lobbied by someone like me. In fact, Chris Mullin lobbied them. And one of the problems with this is the people you're lobbying on behalf of are incredibly unpopular in the public mind.
Yes.
And eventually the Home Secretary did something about it. But but Home Secretaries can't do it. There has to be a process. There has to be a process.
But the commission is not. It needs
just
to be
not good
changed.
Enough. Bear in mind that since the 1970s, there have been at least 500 miscarriages of justice.
500
at least,
and
those
quite
are,
big ones.
Those, yeah, and
This
those
is
are
not just getting a
those are the
parking
ones-
ticket by mistake.
Those are the ones who've been overturned.
Right.
So there'll be a lot more that
haven't.
So 500 minimum. So you've got to have a system that does this properly.
And on top of all this, I think I've got this right because I'm a new starter on this story. There's an ongoing public inquiry looking into lessons to be learned from the whole business. Should that continue at the moment, and will that have any bearing on Letby's guilt or otherwise?
This is what's called the Lady Thirlwall inquiry.
The Thirlwall inquiry.
Thirlwall inquiry, and actually at the beginning, and it starts from the assumption that Letby is guilty. Right. And so how do we deal with a serial murderer is what it's trying to address, right? But I wrote to her on the day before the inquiry happened and said, look, it would be wiser to cast the net a little wider. What if it's incompetence? Because there are other deaths.
Well, that would be a lesson to learn.
And that would be a lesson to learn. And I just got a dead bat letter back. That's a classical bureaucratic letter, mind your own business sort of thing. And so and she suspended it for the moment. It has not come to a decision. And I think it may be that they've realised, because of the last 6 months of basically revelations that have been happening, that maybe they should think a bit wider. And I hope they do. Because again, I reiterate it, the real outcome of this is not simply the recovery, important as it is, of a big miscarriage. It is what we learn for the hospitals.
Now, we're in the final seconds of our talk, which has been fascinating. What would you like, or what will happen next in this?
Well, I would like the CCRC to get on with this really quickly. This young lady's in her 30s. One of the things that was in the notes that you referred to was a comment, I'll never get married, I'll never have babies. She's in her childbearing years. Another 5 or 6 years, if she faces the sort of Sunderland, the Malkinson problem, she'll be out of her childbearing years. And I think that's of itself is an argument.
But you're saying that the initiative is now with the commission to get on with it, which has been publicly exposed to be not fit for purpose.
And I think with Vera Baird being put in yesterday, Vera Baird's not my cup of tea in many ways. She's a very left-wing MP when she's in the House, but I think she has got the drive and the energy to make this work. That's what I am hoping.
We'll keep an eye on that. That's it. David Davis, thank you for coming in and talking to us that.